It is a unique privilege to work in theater and be able to touch and affect people's lives, and I would argue, in fact, affect the course of civilization. The arts are important. You wouldn't know it from time to time. You look at elections coming up, and when the topic is how do we get rid of Big Bird, we're in trouble as a country. And I think, part of the challenge is the way we find our way out of trouble is by the kinds of controversial dialogues that have always been the subject of theater, have always been the subject of the kind of rhetoric and dialogue that's necessary for the maturation of civilization. So while on one level, working in lighting and effects and theater and design and film is really cool, it's also really important. And I think art is important. And I think it's important that the United States, in particular, and the world in general, keeps this alive. And why and what do I want to talk to you today? Because I think it could be an endangered species. So part of the job is how we keep live theater live and alive, etc., in a world of the internet and connectivity and so forth. And that's not to say any of these new things are bad. They're exactly the opposite. But remaining relevant requires a process of continuous reinvention. And so how do we keep reinventing ourselves? And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today, is how do you look into the future? Because the future matters. The future matters so that, as you get older, there are young people behind you who wish to follow and carry the tradition forward, as has happened for thousands of years. And I made a comment last night that it was appropriate to be in Las Vegas to talk about the world's oldest profession, which I would maintain is storytelling. And this art and science of how you tell stories, storytelling was invented to make ideas outlive their authors. How do you make things permanent? Our sense is, with the creation of this conference, that there is something big going on now, and it's hard to put your finger on what it is, but it's going to affect a lot of things. And so I want to talk about that today, about sort of predicting the future, how do you look at it, and how do you chart your life, and why are you in theater? There's no rational reason to work in theater or live entertainment, right? I mean, you can make more money, you can do things, you have stability. There's no rational reason why you lead this life, other than you have no choice. It's genetically something part of you, and once you get bitten or infected by that thing, you're so part of the question becomes, what's next? A number of years ago, there was a conference which has recently turned into a big public deal, especially with the internet, which wasn't before that, which is the TED conference, started by Ricky Werman, Technology, Entertainment, and Design. How many of you know TED and the TED website? Yeah, it's got a big reach now. But when it started in Monterey, California, which is actually where this conference is going to be in the same hall. And it was an intimate experience where people gathered to kind of ask the questions about what's going on and what's there. And this was when the computer revolution, for lack of a better word, was getting started. And you're here because of the computer revolution. I mean, look at the impact of microprocessors and those things. Not look at the impact of, instead of 6 packs with 12 guys or gals, you have one person saying go. The difference is we design differently, and we create different things, and we can build much more complex creative expressions by this ability to put together worlds with cues. This is the fourth dimension, cues. The idea of complex things where the scenic elements, visuals, projections, lighting, lights that move, moving lights that move, all sorts of things happening at the same time to create visions that sweep people away that simply wouldn't be possible to do before. I mean, when I started in lighting, it was working rock and roll. The first show I did was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and that was the first show where we went out on the road with 40 tractor trailers full of equipment and 600 instruments and a symphony orchestra and a collection of other things like that, which up until then was pretty much unheard of. But what happened was that started the can you top this era in live music, where basically people promoted records because of the concerts. So people went to the concerts, they bought the records. That was killed by MTV, where basically MTV and music videos was how you promoted any musical act. We sort of changed the staging to one spotlight and a chair, which became, because the money was going into building videos and doing other stuff like that. And then the entire record industry collapsed because of music sharing, etc. And that collapse in the music industry said, oh, concerts, maybe if we do concerts, people would go. And instead of it being a lost leader to promote the records, which is what it was in the late 60s and early 70s, it became where you made the money because you weren't making any money, on the record. Still, this passion for music, which is part of people's lives, and touching and coming in contact with performers and such, the record business did everything they could to kill music envelope. They thought this was going to be the end of civilization as we know it, just as the motion picture business tried to kill videotape and tried to kill videotape rentals after that, and as the television business tried to kill cable because. And so you look at these transitions, and it turns out iTunes, music video players, etc., didn't in fact put the records companies out of business. It saved the record companies, and it in fact saved the record industry, which was on the way into rapid extinction. So, like I say, go figure. But part of that is sort of, what is this about, and how do you think about this? So that's what the Envision Conference is about. It's about bringing together the best and the brightest we can find and understand in this extended world, and I use the word extended, of telling stories in three-dimensional space and time. And so that means it's theater, it's live performance, it's video game, and video games is it's virtual worlds, it's what will be virtual and augmented reality. It's this larger question of how do you tell stories in time and space. This is time, and this is something important, okay? So the curve does that. That is number of people connected on the internet. It's number of mobile people. It's the number of bits per second, terabits per second that are traveling through the internet in the world. It's the amount of songs you own that are downloaded. It doesn't matter what it is, it's that. It's, the all hell breaking loose curve. And we can't remember, because you wouldn't be in theater if you were good at math, if this is, exponential or logarithmic or geometric, but it's a big curve, right? So that it does that. And in the meantime, there's another curve, and you see this at conferences all over the place, which looks a little like this. Okay, so what's the difference? This is that phenomena driven by the computer revolution of all hell breaking loose. This is, and you, by the way, are benefiting from this, but had nothing to do with it, right? This just kind of happened. You were kind of over there in the corner drinking a beer, and meanwhile you noticed all of a sudden, this whole thing is happening. This is your business, okay? So this is the number of people buying records. This is the number of people buying magazines. This thing here is live theater, if you let it be that. Because unless it keeps reinventing itself, just as the music business had to reinvent itself, what you know of now as being it will become increasingly less relevant to the percentage of population on Earth, because fewer people will see it. Fewer people seeing it means fewer people supporting it, and people's time, attention, and money will go to other things. It doesn't mean that theater is going away, but it's going to become less and less important and more of a curiosity unless we are part of reinventing it on this path, this computer revolution path. Now, a very interesting observation about this was made by a friend and colleague of mine, Alan Kay. Those of you into computer science may know Alan invented the personal computer. It's called the Dynabook at Xerox PARC, the idea of it. He invented object-oriented programming, Smalltalk, and it's now what things like Java are about. And he invented overlapping Windows interfaces. So anytime you pick up a computer and you touch one thing and it comes behind it and does that, that concept was Alan's concept. So Alan's had a pretty good run at doing this, and he has a fairly famous quote, which is the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And so, one of Alan's observations about this whole thing is something that I found actually quite profound, because the sense is, where are you? So, at conference, forward vision conferences, someone will get up and say, you look at this moment where these two curves are crossing, uncalibrated, you don't know what it is, but your sense is this is not a great place to be, right? When you're plummeting past this other thing which is soaring up, your sense is this is not a great place to be. Now, having said that, the presenter usually says, and by the way, we are here, so your sense is, that's not good. One of the gray-bearded people, senior members of the technical theater community, stands up and says, you're an alarmist, we're actually really over here. So you should feel better that, it's 5 minutes from disaster rather than, 30 seconds from disaster. But, the reality is, on one level, you'll have young people looking at it who say, you're all dinosaurs, you're asleep at the switch, you're already irrelevant, we're actually over here, but you're just too thick to have noticed that you're basically out of business, which you could argue is a lot of what's happening in newspaper businesses and such. The real answer relative to you, people in technical theater, live entertainment and such, be where we are relative to the computer revolution and how it's going to affect theater, sensibility, storytelling in the future, is we're here. Because the computer revolution hasn't begun yet. And in fact, the computer revolution that's going to change our world hasn't begun yet. So all these changes, the music industry, 6 billion people wired and connected online, GPS, automated highways, all this stuff that's ahead of you, augmented realities, newspapers going away, that's all happening before the computer revolution has begun. It's like you're standing on the beach, looking at the sunset and the waves breaking, very dramatic, very attractive, makes a nice postcard, but it has nothing that gives you a sense of the magnitude of the ocean, the systems called the ocean, planetary phenomenology, etc. Just a nice little view. What you're getting now is a nice little view of the future. And when it comes to the future of theater, we haven't scratched the surface in technical theater. On one level, you walk around a show like this, and when you're in old fart mode, it's, gee, there's nothing new here, it's the same old thing. How many LED, little things with a clamp on it can you use? And, there are 1,100 LED screens now. That's what we need is another 1,500 more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you walk around and you look at that. But the fact is, again, we're just at what I would call the preliminary bullshit phase of theater technology. We're just at the stage where we're just beginning to get the foundation of the kind of vocabulary necessary to reinvent design, reinvent the creative process, and reinvent storytelling. So if you think you're in a mature business where there's nothing left to invent, it hasn't even started yet. And so that's why the Envision conference is to sort of think about, well, what is out there? And whether it's, where we're setting this is anywhere between 100 years and 5 minutes into the future. So this is a conference for practitioners. It's not for people who want to sit around and think theoretically about great thoughts. It's sort of saying, you're the guys who are going to be establishing that future or not. That's why to me conferences like this one, LDI, have been so important. It's a place to come together in a fairly small community, a very small community here that reaches a lot of people, and share ideas and see how other people did things and get to talk about things. That's what Envision is about as well, but it's hopefully opening the aperture so you can get to experience and talk to other practitioners in fields that you traditionally haven't associated with to be able to get this to happen. So this art and science of storytelling, and how we migrate it into a series of experiences that are so captivating and compelling to audiences that we will capture new audiences, that we will compel older audiences to stay interested, and we can engage people in a different way. We have a big problem in this world. That the other thing that's accelerating with this is, one, the ability to reach large numbers of people and tell them a story together. So you look at that, the number of people you can reach now on the internet compared to any other media that had before, astonishing change. What we're losing is the ability to have a thoughtful conversation about anything. So where are we with all of this? We asked the question, what are the technologies that change the course of civilization? What's the first one you can think of that changed the entire course of civilization?
Dynamo.
Earlier.
Language.
Language. That was the first one we came up with. Before language, we were kind of herd animals and we couldn't interoperate with each other. If you two grew up and you two grew up separately, you would talk to each other because you would evolve a way of talking, but you couldn't interoperate. So the DMX 512 of humankind, the first interoperability standard between these things, was basically saying up, down, me, you. We created a series of languages so people could happen. And those other inventions, like the wheel and plumbing, aqueducts, viaducts, all of that other stuff, someone said farming, You know, all of those things happened because we started living together as social animals in larger groups, depleted the local flora and fauna. And you needed farming, and you needed cities, and you needed roads, and you needed water to make it work. Otherwise, you were at stake. That step function of language destabilized things, requiring a whole set of other inventions. Go forward in time, later technology, past electricity. What changed the world?
Radio.
Radio, absolutely. Anything before that?
Transportation, motor vehicle.
Telegram, transportation. I would argue telegram, yes, probably the telephone more. The telephone, you know, telegraph started it, telephone, you know, had it. Who invented the telephone? Alexander Graham Bell did not invent the telephone. Elijah Gray invented the telephone. Bell got a patent. His Gray filed 2 days late. Turns out it matters on your intellectual property, by the way, that you get it in there on time. The New York Times of the day said the patent office should be disbanded for giving a patent, a precious patent, to this valueless idea of the telephone, which to date has been the most valuable patent ever awarded, was for the telephone. Do you know what Alexander Graham Bell was in business to do? Help the hard of hearing. I was working for an institute to help the hard of hearing, invented the single most alienating technology to the hard of hearing ever developed. Prior to the telephone, business was done face-to-face or by the post. Invention of the telephone, step function, all break loose, commerce went to the telephone. The only people who couldn't participate are people who couldn't speak or hear, which was the only group that was funding it to create new technology. So we looked at all of this, and we came up with 3 very interesting recurring themes in the history of invention that changed civilization. One, when ideas were presented, the inventors were generally clueless about the importance of their inventions. So, Bell, inventors of this, you got on the list, the inventors who invented the various things, almost everywhere they're important. People inventing in our business don't understand the real implications of why some of the ideas were important. They were just solving a problem. Some people get it right, most people get it wrong. 2, the importance and impact of these inventions usually have to wait for other inventions to happen at the same time. So if you have an Apple Newton is pretty close to the vision of, you know, this. The only difference is the Apple Newton was this big, wasn't networked, and because the designers were thoughtful and knew you couldn't put little buttons on a phone and have anyone use it, it used advanced character stroke recognition, which turns out to be totally unnecessary because you can put little buttons on a phone. Everybody can use it. The Newton is pretty much the same as the iPhone. You know, same kind of vision. 20 years ago, completely failed, nobody took it seriously. So one of the recurring challenges is where do you find the ones that are important? An astonishing theme in the inventions that were permanent is they're all about storytelling. So if you look at the inventions that you can think of, are the ones that you talked about, language, writing, printing, radio, telephone, one of the things that became obvious is storytelling, and the storytelling inventions became permanent because people cared. Now, what do you mean? We don't have wax cylinders. That wasn't the invention. The invention is how do you make music portable in space and time. And it started with wax cylinders, went to 78s, went to LPs, went to 8-tracks, went to compact discs, went to, you know, downloadable things, will go to direct, ubiquitous, wired, cloud-based things. It's the same invention. It's just the implementation is different. Just like a moving spot is the same invention, irrespective of whether it's an ARC source or an HMI source or an LED source. So it's easy when you're involved in technology to get stuck down in the muck and think it's about the detail. No, it's about what's the impact on human beings and their lives and storytellers who tell those stories. You're going to have people experiencing live theater on their cell phones, and if you're not thinking now about how you're creatively and technically going to do that, you are going to lose your audience. It's as simple as that. Now, hopefully, people will find it compelling enough, they will come see and participate with the live theater. And hopefully you will find a way to have them participate in live events, even though they're not there, so that it's not just a witnessed event from afar, but they are actually part of it. And so I imagine when you see rock concerts where 3/4 of the audience is going to be virtual, but live and responding and lighting their, you know, lighters and yelling and screaming and being seen as part of this large virtualized experience, which will also be real. Theme parks will be real. They will be physical worlds. You're going to learn about the theme park in the virtual world. You're going to meet people in the virtual world. You're going to meet them in the real world. You're going to continue these experiences, and we're going to blur the line between where these things stop. This seems scary for you? My view would be get over it, or just stand and watch it blow by. This is what the Envision conference is about. It's about having the kind of dialogues, having the kinds of speakers, having the kinds of seminars and participations with people, where we can ask some of these harder and thoughtful questions, where we can develop tools for how we look at technologies, and where we can come together to actually generate real ideas for where this stuff is all going. It is a great privilege to come talk to you today, and again, I am deeply moved by everything you do. Have been here, has always been my passion, and will continue to be so. The stuff that Envision is a word that, I hate to use at a conference because it's the kind of thing that would scare people away. In fact, it's important. There are important topics ahead of us in theater, in technical theater, in the social dynamic of the role theater has to educate the population, and how we get our kids excited and understand the importance so they can carry it forward. That's what Envision is about. We hope you will come. We hope you will bring everyone you knew that come to Monterey so we can continue the discussion. And thank you for listening.